Thank you, Clarence. Good evening, friends. My name is Ray, and I'm an alcoholic. And the first thing I want you to know about me is I'm a member of the world-famous Waldorf group. And we are located in Waldorf, Maryland. And Waldorf, Maryland is located 20 miles south of Washington, D.C. on Route 301. And the world-famous Waldorf group meets on Wednesdays and Saturday evenings at 8:30. And if you're ever in the area, we'd certainly like to have you come by and share with us. We think you'd find right away that it's probably the best group in all of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we hope you feel that way about your home group. If you don't leave your group and go to somebody else's and mess it up. Stick with your own and see if you can get things squared away. I really and truly believe that they were trying to outlast me tonight. And no way. No way. I would like you to know, too, that my wife, Linda, was able to come with me on this trip, as she does most trips. I always say that I married her to be with her, and she's here, and she's also a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she celebrated her 11th anniversary the past July 20th. And I'm certainly glad that she was able to come with me. At this time, I want to congratulate the committee on their fine choice of speakers for this convention. Did you read that rundown? Really, it's really tremendous. And I especially want to congratulate them on their choice this evening, for this evening. It's good to be in Harrisonburg at your state convention. I think it's the 37th, and I feel very privileged to be here, and I am very grateful. I spoke some time ago, some years ago, I think at the Valley Rally in Staunton, and it was a real privilege for me to be there, and I've met some of the people that were there. They went home this afternoon, but I'm glad some of you stayed. You could probably tell that I get a little confused. You know, when I left the stage a few minutes ago, I'd forgotten that I hadn't gone to the bathroom. And I really get a little confused when I'm about to do this. No matter how many times I do it, I get into this state of confusion. I don't know what I'm going to do, what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it. I'm reminded of another alcoholic that had a problem with confusion. The story is these two guys were out hunting. One guy was an alcoholic, and the other guy was normal, whatever the hell that is. And they came on this pond, and this young woman had been in swimming, and as they approached the pond, she got out, and she was nude. And she just stood there. And they walked toward her, and they got alongside her, and she was still standing there, so the normal guy kind of sashayed over to her, and he whispered in her ear, he says, are you game? And she said, yeah. And the alcoholic shot her. This next guy had to be an alcoholic. He was 95 and she was 90. And she hadn't been feeling well, and she went to the doctor, and the doctor examined her, and he came back in the room, and he asked her to sit down, and she did, and he told her she was pregnant. And she sat there about 5 minutes, just froze. She could not move, and presently she was able to dial the phone, and she called her husband. And he answers the phone, and right away she gets on. She said, you old geezer, you have got me pregnant. And there was a pause on the line, and the old man cleared his throat. And he says, to whom am I speaking? I thought I would tell you all those things so you wouldn't expect very much from me up front. I thought I would let you know where I was coming from. Now, I am supposed to, like everybody else that gets up here, I think anyway, tell you a little about myself before I drank, what happened, and what my life has become since I've been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous And within the 2 short hours that's been allotted me, I'm going to attempt to do that. And it certainly shouldn't take that long. We're going to try to be out here as soon as we can. I was born in the state of Virginia. But as soon as I was big enough to see where I was, I got the hell out of here. My hometown is Fredericksburg. But I was actually born and raised 6 miles south of Fredericksburg at a little dot on the map called Port Royal Forks. They have since found it necessary to change the name of that little dot on the map. It's now called New Post. And that ought to excite the hell out of everybody. And that's what they call it. And my mom and dad and my 3 brothers and 1 sister, the 7 of us, lived in a very small 4-room house, and we were very poor. I will describe to you how poor we were by telling you that around our house the rainbow showed up in black and white. And we weren't doing all that great. I was born in the year that the stock market crashed in the Great Depression, 6 months to the day actually before it crashed. And my dad, I think what happened to him, that he did the best that he could do, but he couldn't do very much around that area, and he just deserted the family. I think he just couldn't take it anymore. So that left my mom and my sister and my 3 brothers and myself, and we became a ward of the state of Virginia. And we went on what we called at that time relief. And I didn't like that at all. I did not like that. I remember in my very earliest days we would go to Spotsylvania Courthouse where the jail is, and we would get this relief food, and I didn't like that. I remember the feelings that I've had when they would give me these things. I think every time they gave me something like that, it took something from me, some of my dignity or something, and I just didn't like that. And I became very, very negative, extremely negative, from the very beginning of my recollections of anything. And I reminded of how negative I was. There was a guy, he was also negative. He was in the Air Force. The paratroopers actually, and they were going up for their first jump. And the instructor got them all together, and they said, now we're going to get aboard the plane. Everything's going to be fine. And we're going to get up about 3,000 feet. We'll be about 12 miles out. We're going to jump. There'll be trucks there to bring us back, and everything's going to be fine. So they got aboard the aircraft, and they got up, and the guy wouldn't jump. He just knew his chute wasn't going to open. So he wouldn't jump, so they pushed him out. So sure enough, the chute didn't open. And he's falling on down, and he pulled the ripcord on the emergency chute, and that didn't open either. And now he's really going on down, and with his negative thinking, he's thinking to himself, well, I don't guess those damn trucks will be there either. And that was about the way I felt. Up until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, really. I am 4 grades of school, formally educated, reminding me of something of the speaker this morning. I went to school in a building that had 2 rooms, and they had 7 elementary grades in the 2 rooms, 4 grades in one room and 3 in the other. And I got through the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade without any problem at all. We only had 1 teacher, and I got into 4th grade, and I couldn't pass. I just could not pass. And I had heard this work all these years, and I got to the 4th grade, and I stayed in that thing a lot longer, and I want to tell you, I'll give you a hint. I stayed in the 4th grade so long I started to date the teacher. But you know, now I know why I didn't pass out of the 4th grade. It was because I didn't think I was able to do the 5th grade work. I just did not think that I could do that. I was just a negative person. I just went around, I didn't go to school anymore, and I went around through the community, and I did whatever menial jobs that I could do, that people would allow me to do, whatever monies I could make, and I took it home to my mom and to supplement the monies that she was getting. So that basically is my life as a child. And it's necessary that I tell you that, because I want you to know as much about me as I can possibly tell you from the podium, because the freedom that's attached to that, to me, is incredible. When I can tell you things about me It allows me to have a lot of freedom. I was in my hometown in Fredericksburg one day, and I was 17 years of age, and I had never tasted alcohol, and a guy there had a bottle of wine, and he gave me a drink. And by the time that bottle of wine was gone, my whole attitude about everything had changed. I was a nice guy. I was a nice-looking guy. I was smart. I wasn't as short as I am. Always wanted to be 6 feet tall. Always. I always thought if I was 6 feet tall, I could make it. I don't know what that means. But I was taller than my 5 feet 8 and a 16th. I just felt that I was taller than that. And by the time that bottle of wine was gone, my life it was just like me stepping from one world into another. And I know that from that very first time, I don't know whether or not I was alcoholic, but I know for sure that I was at least psychologically addicted to the drug alcohol. Because for the next 20 years, on a daily basis, I drank something that contained the drug alcohol each and every day. Every day. And I never ever entertained the thought of not drinking. It was my right. I loved it. I loved everything about it. And I just drank all the time. Of course, I was not always drunk. But I drank all the time. The only days that I know in succession that I didn't drink that amounted to anything were the 9 days going over aboard ship and 11 days coming back. But other than that, I drank all the time. And it was my right, and I loved it. When I was 21, I was married. I met a woman there in my hometown, and her mother owned a restaurant. And we went together about a year, and shortly after we were married, they sold the restaurant. And they were Washingtonians. So they moved back to Washington, D.C., and I came along with them, and that was in July of 1950. So I did most of my alcoholic drinking in and around the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. When I was 23, I went in the military, and I was in basic training down in Camp Pickett, Virginia. I was in the medical corps, and Korea was a mess. It was just a mess, and I was scared to death. I knew that the only reason that I was there, or any of us were there, was to go to Korea. And after 16 weeks of basic training, they put us all in this huge building. And all but 13 of us got orders cut to go to the West Coast. And they put 13 of us in a corner over here, and they said, "You men are going to Austria." And I had never heard of it. And I asked the guy next to me, I said, "Man, where's Austria?" He said, "It's nowhere near Korea." I said, "Well, I'm ready. I'm ready right now." And of course, they didn't allow that, and I went home for the 10-day delay en route. And I was living somewhere near the stadium now in Washington in an apartment. And I stayed there 10 days, and I got aboard ship in New York, and we went to Italy, and I went up into Austria. And I stayed there 19 months, and I had a holiday. I had a real holiday. The only problem was that I was drinking more than I could afford with my pay, and I was borrowing more money from the guys than I could repay. And I was getting in trouble with that, and it was just a no-no. So right away, I knew that I was in trouble with alcohol, and I was 23 years old. I just knew that I had a problem with it, but I could not stop drinking. I came home. I spent 19 months in Austria. I came home, and I was honorably discharged, and I eventually wound up in construction. I was 25 years old at this time, and my wife wanted me to hurry up and go to work, and I couldn't understand what a hurry was. And I eventually wound up in construction, and I mixed mortar for a little over 3 years. I eventually became a mechanic in my trade, which means that I'm a ceramic tile setter. My salary at least doubled. I didn't pay any attention to that. I was perfectly comfortable the way I was. My life was fine. My wife was working. She was a bookbinder. We had 2 incomes. We had a nice apartment. We had a nice car. We dressed well. We went anywhere we wanted to go. We went to the Lotus a lot down in D.C. I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of that, but that was the place to be. That was the place to go in those years. And we went there a lot, and everything was fine. And I never thought about or tried to aspire to anything, and I really didn't. In my inventory, I've tried to figure that out, and I really did not. I was comfortable the way I was. And I worked maybe a month as a mechanic. As soon as I became a mechanic, I went in the union, as I said, I think. And about a month after I'd been in there, they had this job that the government wanted done right away, and we went down and we had a lot of overtime time. I took a cot along. Most of the guys did, and we just would work as long as we could, and we would lie down, and we'd sleep a while, and we'd get up and work some more. Some of that time was triple time. And I took all this money home, and my wife and I put it on the kitchen table one night, and it was more money than I thought I'd ever be able to earn in my lifetime. And I became very greedy. It was the obsession to get more money together, more material things, was very akin to the obsession that I had in that park years earlier to drink more alcohol. The feeling was very akin. And I started now to try to, I think what I tried to do from now on was to try to make up what I thought I'd been cheated out of in my childhood. And I couldn't do that. I just couldn't do it. I tried, and I don't know that it can be done, but I know that I couldn't do it. And I figured out, it took me about a month to figure out how to keep everybody else's hands out of my money. And what I had figured out, the way to do that was to go into business for myself, and that's what I did. And in the year 1960 and 61, by that time, I had formed a company. I had 3 trucks on the road. I had a minimum of 7 people working for me. And I knew that I had arrived as far as the economics of my life were concerned. I knew that. I would say to myself, Ray, you will never have to be poor again. Ever. And I knew that. It was a conscious thought. As long as I could just hold the status quo in my company, I never had another thing to worry about. And being poor again was very important to me. I was obsessed with that by now. And I was just really sick. I was really sick. I worked 7 days a week, however many hours it took. I remember sometime I would come home. We had a son by now. And sometime I would come home in the evening and drive a truck home. Sometimes I would. And my son just wanted to get in his dad's truck and ride around the block. Sometimes I would do that, and sometimes I wouldn't. Most of the times I would have to go in the house and get on the phone so I could find some more money. I could promote some more jobs, things of that nature. I just did not have time. I sent them anywhere they wanted to go. Anywhere. The money was available to them. They could go anywhere they wanted to go. I know one time, to take care of some of my guilt, I was told later that my son, when he was 4 years old, had 24 changes of short pants for summer wear. 24 changes. But I didn't have time for anything but just my greed. And I bought a nice house down near Clinton. I was obnoxious. I was new money. If you've ever been around new money, I don't have to say any more to you. I was just really obnoxious. And I bought this house. It was already almost under construction. They had put the footers in. And I insisted that the man put me a 2-car garage on the side of the house. And in order to do that, he had to twist the house on the lot. And I just insisted that he do that. And after a while, he asked me why I was so insistent on 2-car garage. And I said, well, when you got 2 Cadillacs, you got to have some place to put them. And that was my attitude. And I was really sick. People meant nothing to me, absolutely nothing. And I certainly don't feel good about that, but that's the way I was. I was just trying to make up for what I thought I'd been cheated out of in my childhood. And I was very sick. As I was building my house, I had a nice barbecue pit in the backyard, and a nice, beautiful barbecue pit. It was a big one. And the lot next door was sold, and this guy built his house, and he put a barbecue pit in his backyard was bigger than mine. And I just knew that no self-respecting drunk would put up with that, so I just tore mine down and had made bigger than his. And we got into what I now refer to as this barbecue pit war. And by the time this barbecue pit war was over, my barbecue pit was damn near as big as my house. And you know, it never dawned on me one time I didn't even need a barbecue pit. It was not necessary at all. And my life continued this way, but see, alcoholism is an illness, and it's progressive. And we reach a point, I know I did anyway, and I think that most people that I talk with do, we reach a point that we go so far with all our imagination and all the help we have from our friends, and all our conniving, and all our cheating, and all our lying, we get to a certain point, and then it's down. And I got to that point. And they told me that if I didn't straighten up that I was going to lose my business. Now, I didn't want to do that because it was an extension of me. It was something that I had worked very hard for. I had created it from nothing, and it was mine. and I did not want to do that. And I had to make a decision as to whether or not I was going to continue to drink or try to save my business. And I think any time that I was confronted with a decision of that kind in my drinking in my other life, I always chose to drink. Now, I don't know whether or not at that time I really still had a choice. I may have already been placed beyond myself. I may have already placed myself beyond human aid, as it says in the book. But I know that I didn't pay any attention to that. I just continued to drink, and the day came that I had to go in for the bankruptcy petition signing of my company. We went through with that. I was able to keep my house. I went back to work in a union company, and they were glad to have me to begin with as a tile setter. And you know, I could have lived in that house to this day on a tile setter's wages because they don't do bad. But see, I continued to drink. And alcoholism being the progressive illness that it is, my life continued to deteriorate. It's a slow progression of the human spirit and personality. And the day came that I was no longer physically or mentally able to give a man a day's work as a mechanic. And I wound up, my life had taken a complete circle by now, and I wound up back in the mortar box from where I'd started. And everything was gone. And I mean everything. There was nothing left. And my wife and I and our 9-year-old son at this time, we were living in a $10 a week sleeping room at 12th and Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast in Washington, D.C. The bathroom was in the hallway. She was cooking on a hot plate, and what she would cook would be what I would steal because I certainly wasn't going to spend my wine money for anything as ridiculous as food. And we were eventually evicted from that. We went back to the room one day. We were together, all three of us, and that was unusual. But we started in the house, and the landlady had locked the door, and she put all our belongings, such as they were, on the front porch, and she wouldn't even allow my wife to go upstairs to see whether or not she'd overlooked anything. She just wanted us out. Well, she wanted me out, is really what it was. But the only way to get rid of them, of me, was to get rid of them. So we just came back down on the corner, the three of us, my wife and my 9-year-old son and I, came back down on the corner of 12th and Pennsylvania Avenue. We just stood there and we looked at each other. And presently she took the boy by the hand and she started walking down toward where her brother's house was. And I just stood there until they got out of sight and we didn't say a word. And as soon as they were out of sight, I just turned around and I started walking up Pennsylvania Avenue toward the Capitol building. And I didn't see either of those people for the next 2 years. I didn't see or hear from them. I went straight past the Capitol building on down to 12th and New York Avenue Northwest by the bus stations there. And there's a park there. And I went over and sat down in that park. And I went directly there, and I knew exactly where I was going. I knew where I was heading, and I sat in that park, and I was more comfortable then than I had been in years because now I was where I belonged. You know, I had driven up to the red lights there. It's a huge intersection. And I'd driven up to those lights many times, sometime in a new car, sometime in a new truck. And I would just sit there for the light to change and look at those people over in that park with the two overcoats and the way they lived. And I knew very well that someday I would be there. I just knew that I would be there. See, when I was drinking, I was insane, but I wasn't crazy. And I knew exactly what was happening to me. But I was absolutely powerless over alcohol. I didn't know that in that terminology in those days, but I just could not stop drinking. Bill Wilson refers to alcoholism in the first step as a merciless obsession. And that's exactly what it was with me. And I just could not stop. And for the next 2 years, I just walked the streets of the District of Columbia, and the only thing I owned two of the last 2 years that I drank were overcoats. Every time I saw an overcoat that wasn't wrapped around somebody, I'd put it on. Easiest thing I ever stole. And I don't want to promote anything here, but it really is the easiest thing I ever stole. If this was the wintertime, we'd have a coat room here somewhere, and everybody would just leave the coat. Yeah, they would. You know, I started telling this story around Southeast when in the Washington area when I first got sober about stealing overcoats. And in the wintertime particularly, every time just before the hour fall, there'd be a pause and everybody go get the coat. But I would walk the streets of the District of Columbia with 2 overcoats, and I would bum quarters. And that's all I ever did. I came to Baltimore sometime with some people that would sell their blood. I never sold my blood. I did not do that. I would have, but I hadn't done that. I would drink the wine for the money that they got for their blood, but I did not sell my blood. And I just walked the district. I remember the humiliation of alcoholism, in particular with this one, and I always think of this when I'm privileged to do this. I remember one day I was really sick. And I needed another quarter. I was needed a quarter, and there was a lady standing at a bus stop in the district there, and I walked alongside, and she was facing the street, and I walked alongside her, and I asked her for a quarter, and she didn't acknowledge whether or not she'd heard me. And I tugged her on her sleeve, and she didn't give it to me. So I just walked on to somebody else. I did everything and any other wine I was ever done in order to get another drink of wine. You can just fill the blank in. Whatever it took is what I would do because I was obsessed. And I was really sick. The last 10 months that I drank, 3 other winos and I went over on the old Kenilworth Avenue dump. Now, nobody knows where that is here, but there used to be a dump in the metropolitan Washington area. It was called the old Kenilworth Avenue dump. It was the biggest dump in the area. Of course, being alcoholic, I was still thinking big. If I was going to live somewhere, I might as well live there. And how I got to the dump, I was in Comar Manor one morning in front of the Pincus liquor store, and I needed another quarter, and by this time, everything seemed silhouetted to me. I just couldn't see very well, and things were silhouetted, people were silhouetted. And I saw this person standing there, and I didn't give a damn whether it was a man or a woman or what it was, as long as it had a quarter. So I walked up to it and asked it for a quarter, and they started yelling and said, "Man, what the hell is wrong with you?" And he got far enough away I could see him now, and he had on 2 overcoats too. And he just didn't say another word. He just took me around in back of the building, inside of the building there, and he gave me a drink of his wine. And he informed me that there were 2 other guys there, so they came back. They'd been sent to steal something. I can't remember what it was. We used to go on errands like that. The 4 of us came back, and we just walked around the rest of the afternoon. We wound up all the way back in the back of the little town of Comar Manor, and that adjourned the dump site. The property is back up to the dump site, this man knows. And we were standing there, and they were filling it in at the time. They were filling the dump in. And this truck came in and emptied the bed of trash that he had on there. A big piece of plywood fell off. And one of the guys said, "You know, we ought to go over there and build ourselves a shack." And I would have never thought of that. I could not have thought of that in my alcoholic mind. And so as soon as they got done working that afternoon, we went right over and we built a makeshift shack that was well enough that we could sleep in it that night. And that's where I spent the last 10 months that I drank, in that shack on that dump. And, you know, me being in construction, it was an automatic thing that I'd take charge of the building of the shack. You know, it almost went without saying. And this shack had to be a little bit special because it had to be portable. You see, they would fill in a while and then we moved. We had to move a lot. We moved a lot in that. And I fortified that thing. I worked on it real hard, and I fortified it from the rats. They were big as cats. They really were. None of us were ever bitten. I've concluded now they probably found something decent to eat. I'm not sure of that, but that must be the only answer. And I would get out of that shack, and a quarter of that shack was mine. And nobody could run me out of it. I had my 9 perishables there, my sardines, my potted meat, my crackers, and stuff like that. And I could go and lie down in that corner of that shack, and nobody could run me out. You know, I'd get back there, and sometime I would say, "Well, Ray, you know, you're really not doing too bad." You know, and considering the prior months, I really wasn't, because now at least I had some place to go. And I'd get out of that shack in the morning. I had to go down on Bladensburg Road every morning to get me another bottle of Wild Ice Rose. And if I couldn't find a drink in the morning, when I was walking through the town of Comar Manor, I know I was shaking so bad people thought I was waving at them. And I would get down there, and I'd always get me 3 pints. 3 pints before I came back to the dump. And I would drink one on the way back, and I would get in there, and I'd lie down, and I would be somewhere near the 3rd ring of Saturn by this time on that Wild Ice Rose, and I really didn't think that I was doing too bad. And you know, my self-esteem, I really believed this rose some when I got to the dump, because I had a place to go and lie down. And I just kept always lowering my expectation of myself. And that's the way my life was. My real dream about that shack was that someday I was going to collect me, I'd already started, I was going to collect me enough brick that I was going to put me a patio alongside that sucker and just say to hell with it. I didn't last that long. Really, my sober date is December the 14th, 1966. And on that date, I was put in jail in La Plata, Maryland for my 12th time. The other times, I was 3 times in number 5 in Southeast, and I was just talking to somebody at the convention. He had been there 4 in the precinct there. But these things were just minor things, like drunken disorderly, indecent exposure, and stuff like that happens to drunks and other people, I guess. But this time I was in jail and I was in bad trouble. I was with a guy. There was an escapee from the Clifton T. Perkins criminally insane place over near Jessup, Maryland. He owed him 12 years and he gave him 4 and he ran. And he ran into me one morning and he asked me to get in his car. Beautiful car. Well, it should have been. He had stolen it and he had his pick. And I couldn't imagine anybody asking me to get in a nice car like that because the front of my pants stayed wet all the time. And I don't say that for any drama. The last year that I drank, that's the way I lived. And he asked me to get in. And we were going to rob a place in the district. He was a thief. He was a professional thief. He didn't drink. He did not drink. And right away when I found out he didn't drink, I didn't trust him. Yeah. And we were supposed to rob a place down in the district, and he had already cased it. He had already drawn it out at this quarter. I had to run. He told me, he said, well, you got to run when you get there. I said, well, you count me out, I can hardly walk. And he scratched that, and we went down to La Plata, down below, in southern Maryland, down below La Plata. And we were robbing a man's place down there, and the police came up. They had been bugged to the police headquarters, and they came up with the lights out, and they caught us in there, and they put us in jail in La Plata on December 14th, 1966. Now, that's my sober date. I know now with the information that I've gathered from people just like yourselves that I don't have to drink anymore. I know that. And that's the greatest information I think that anybody's ever given me, especially when you showed me how not to. I'd been in jail there 5 days, and I went into what I now know is delayed DTs, and I damn near died. They had another guy in the cage there with me, and they took him out for his protection. They just left me in there to do whatever I was going to do, and whatever I was going to do, I damn near killed myself. It was just an animal, and it took, it just took that. It just took that. I think it takes what it takes. And I stayed in there 45 days altogether, and on January 30th, 1967, I was tried and convicted of grand larceny. I was facing a maximum of 15 years in the state prison. The judge there, J. Dudley Diggs, who's since died, gave me 2 years. He sentenced me to 2 years to Maryland House Corrections. And as soon as he did that, immediately upon doing that, he made a felon of me, but he also looked down at me over his glasses, and he says to me, he said, Mr. Bennett, he said, I believe you're worth saving. And of course I agreed with him. And he suspended a 2-year prison sentence, and he court-ordered me for 6 months to Crownsville. Now, every place I've ever been, there's a Crownsville. I think Western State would be Crownsville here, or the equal. And on the afternoon of January 30th, 1967, of the morning that I had been tried and convicted, I was transported to Crownsville that afternoon. Now, Crownsville is predominantly a mental institution, and it's located near Annapolis, Maryland. And it's been there forever. But they had set aside 2 cottages within the institution for the care and rehabilitation of alcoholics that got in trouble in Charles County, Calvert County, and St. Mary's County. And my trouble was in Charles County, so they transported me there. And on the way up there, which is about an hour drive, I was transported there by a special police officer. On the way, I was 37 years old, and I hadn't had a drink in 45 days now, the first time in my adult life since I started drinking, and I was sober physically, as sober as I'll ever be. I tried to figure out how on earth I got from where I had been to where I was, and I could not figure that out. I'm 37 years old. My earthly belongings were in a 10-pound bag, a brown paper bag. And I was on my way to a mental institution, and the court order read that I was to be confined there until I was no longer in a danger to myself or the community. which could have been a long, long time. And I could not figure it out, what had happened to me. But I got there, and that night, I went to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in Cottage 15. And that's the best thing that ever happened to me in my life without exception. They had these AA people coming in there. They called themselves AAs. I thought they were freaky. We were 110 strong, and they would come in there, all mass, and take up the whole front row, and they'd talk about loving each other, and just in front of each other. This guy would tell this other guy he loved him, and all that stuff. And after the very first meeting, this guy wanted to hold my hand. And I just told him, I said, listen, buddy, you ain't holding my hand. I said, you hold somebody else's hand if you want to, you ain't holding my hand. But this guy took a liking to me, and he's in the area. No, he's not in the area, but he's still a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for sure, and one of my very dearest friends, and I love him dearly today. And he took a liking to me, and after every meeting, he'd come up to me and try to get me to go to Jesus or somewhere. And I didn't understand that. I really and truly didn't understand that. Every time he came in there, he would come right toward me. And after these meetings were over, I would just run upstairs, get in bed, cover up, clothes and all on, because I didn't know how to treat these people. And I was obviously didn't know how to treat me, because I didn't know anything about this man telling each other they loved each other, holding each other's hands. And I'd been there about 30 days, and this guy got on this real spiritual high, and I know that now. And after this meeting was over, he rushed right up to me, and he said, Ray, I love you. I said, don't touch me. Just don't touch me. If you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous and people are acting like they love you, they just do. And that's all there is to it. And that's really all we have to know. And I tell you, that's the real power here. That's the real power. I think the finest definition of Alcoholics Anonymous, when it's really honed down, would be love. And that's where the power is, because I can tell you now, what happened to me when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous was that you loved me until I could love myself. And that was the therapy here. It was for me. And I know that now. And I think that's it for everybody. That is the real power. I stayed in Crownsville 4.5 months. And on June 6, 1967, I was released. I came home to a wife that didn't need me or want me necessarily, a 12-year-old son that had never seen his father sober. She had gone back to work. She had a nice apartment. She didn't need me. And the only way that I got in touch with her or could have anything to do with her, because when I was coming out of Crownsville, a mental institution, you have to have a permanent address, and my family would not sign for me. My brothers or my one sister or my mom. And they were afraid of me. They weren't afraid of me. They didn't know what to do with me. And I had to have a permanent address, so she was kind enough to sign me out with the understanding that I was to sleep on her couch until I was financially able to move on. And those are the conditions that I came home under. And I talked to my 12-year-old son that afternoon, the first time in his life that he has ever seen his father sober. And we stayed together for 4 years. And we did everything. I finally talked to him and let me get back in a big bed. She went to Al-Anon. We had therapy people, men and women, marriage therapists. We had an A baby. We did everything that I knew or anybody else could suggest to me to do to save our marriage, and it just didn't work. And after 4 years, we sat down and we discussed it, and we decided we both deserved better. There weren't any women involved. There wasn't anything indecent involved. It's just that our marriage was over. But we really gave it a try. And that's all I know to say. And after I told her in 10 days that I would be gone, and in 10 days I was gone. But when I came out of Crownsville on June 6, 1967, I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that night, which was suggested to me. And I started to walk, and I hitchhiked, and I got a ride, and I went to the St. Barnabas Road group in Oxon Hill, Maryland. And those people welcomed me there. They just did. I thought they'd been put up to something when I was in Crownsville. I thought the people acted strange there, and I said, well, I'm here, and maybe they're paid to do this. I really didn't know. But when I got to the St. Barnabas Road group that night, they had no reason to do that. And I was treated as an equal when I walked in. I just knew that everybody there wanted me there. And what I brought to Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't very much. I can tell you that. It was not very much. They had released me that morning with the clothes that they had given me from the state. They told me they fit me, and I knew they didn't. I had on a pair of shoes that they had issued me when I got there, and it looked like when I took them over to little Abner had thrown them away. I didn't have any place to go really at that time because I hadn't talked to my wife into letting me stay there yet. I didn't have a dime, not a dime. Now I'm 38 years old. The only monies that I had, I was entitled to a $60 one-shot check from the state of Maryland because I had been institutionalized within the state of Maryland for longer than 60 consecutive days. And I got that $60 check about 2 months later. And that was the sum of my nothing. I had absolutely nothing. I had 9 teeth. 9 teeth. And I love peanuts. Love peanuts. And the tragedy of that whole thing was that none of the teeth were over the other. And I would get these damn peanuts and I would try to eat them out. Okay. But they told me, he said, Ray, you keep coming back and you don't take a drink, things will get better. And they were right. And I knew that those people cared for me when I walked in there. I just knew that. And I kept coming. I went each every night for at least 2 years. Because I wasn't in very much demand anywhere else. And I just kept going to AA meetings. And within the first 3 months, I had gotten a home group and a sponsor. Our first home group was the Congress Heights Group. It was located in southeast Washington, D.C. at the time. And they had elections there. I'd been home about 2.5, 3 months. They had elections one night, and I won the coffee pot. And I won it because the guy that had it didn't want it anymore. That's why I got it. And that became my home group. And one of the hardest things that I've had to do in Alcoholics Anonymous was to declare myself a member of the Waldorf group where I am now. That was after 13 years. It was like a divorce or something. That was a real traumatic thing for me. I thought on that for about a month. Also, within the first 3 months, I got a sponsor. My sponsor's name was Ed Thompson. Ed died 3 years ago, this October 8th, after being sober 29 and a half years. And we stayed sober together, he and I, for 17 years until he died. And I first met him. He was speaking at the Metropolis Club in Washington, D.C., and he was dressed. He was a natty dress. He really looked nice. He was a sharp-looking guy. He was neat. He moved around. He knew exactly where his foot was going to land, and I was stumbling over matchsticks. And I really wanted to be like this guy. I didn't want to be him. He was just so sure of himself. Just so sure of himself. He'd been sober 13 years at the time. And during this talk, I had never seen him before, but during this talk, he got to talking about he was an employee of the telephone company in the district there. And he was talking about his alcoholism. He was a lineman, a cable splicer. And he'd be down these holes, and his job was to put the blue to the blue and the green to the green and red to the red. He wasn't doing that. He had St. Augustine talking to Baltimore and Philadelphia talking to San Francisco and all that stuff. So they didn't want to find him. They took him out of there, and they said they wanted him to get his life together because he was a good man. He said, Ed, what we'll do is we will build you a box, and we'll put it in the main office downtown. He said, now, you get up in the morning, you come in, sit up on the box, don't touch nothing, and we'll pay you. And this is how I knew this guy was going to be my man, and I'd never seen him before. He said he got so bad off with his alcoholism because he continued to drink, and the progression was always down. He got so bad off that he would get up in the morning and call in and tell him he was too sick to come and sit on the box. And I knew very well then with that statement that this guy would be able to help me. He would be able to understand me. And as soon as the meeting was over, I rushed right up to him and I asked him if he would sponsor me, and he said he would, and I made sure that he did. He worked from midnight to 8, and I was at his house every morning for breakfast. Yeah. And I did not know that I wasn't supposed to do that. And really didn't care. He told me he was going to help me, and I was going to make damn sure he did, because, you know, I knew he knew something that I didn't know. He knew how to stay sober. He knew how to stay sober, and he had been doing it for 13 years then. And I just kept up with him. And we went all the places that everybody goes. We did all the things that a sponsor and pigeon relationship goes through. I really believe that. It was the most unique relationship that I've ever had in my life, before or since. I really loved this guy. I didn't always like him. I didn't always like what he said. But I always listened. Always listen, because he may be saying the right thing. I did not always agree with him, but he was always my sponsor. Always. We could be in a crowd of people 1,000 strong, and I would have the sense. I would be aware that he was in there somewhere. That was what our relationship was like. And he was just a tremendous, tremendous influence in my life. The greatest influence in my life was my sponsor, ever. Ever. He died, and we knew he was going to die. It was terminal cancer. And he was dead a year, and I waited a year, and I knew I was going to do that, and I asked another man to be my sponsor. And I have a sponsor. I met him before I met Ed. And this man has been sober about 36 years now. His name is Carl T. And he lives in District Heights, Maryland. And I have a sponsor. I would not be without a sponsor. And I would not be without a home group. And I wouldn't be in a home group that didn't have a GSR. That had something to do with what happened with the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's enough of that, because I'm not supposed to talk about that. But I wouldn't anyway. And I kept coming to Alcoholics Anonymous because that's what you told me to do. That's what you told me happened to you. They used to say to me, keep coming back, keep coming back. I thought that was the silliest damn thing I'd ever heard in my life. Keep coming, keep coming. I said, well, I'll keep coming. And I kept coming. And I just knew people here loved me. I knew that. And I was asked to lead some meetings, and I was asked to do things like this. Most of the time they were sorry. I just started to take off. I became self-employed almost as soon as I came home from Crownsville. And my life was getting better again. And everything was going fine. And when my wife and I separated, after 4 years, my children's mother, I respectfully refer to her as that now, and my AA baby was 3 years old. And we started to live apart, and I lived alone for 8 years. I went over and I rented a small efficiency apartment at Andrews Air Force Base near there, and it was a temporary thing, very small, efficiency. And I started to live there, and I went to AA meetings every night. I would sneak off my own job and go in the afternoon, and I would go at night. I probably went to average a meeting a day the first 10 years that I was sober. And I did that because it gave me great joy, and it helped me, and I just loved it. And I just kept going to AA, and about 9 years ago, I met a little over 9 years. I better get this right. I met Linda, my present wife, and we've been married now 7 years in January. And she had a nice, beautiful home down in Waldorf, where we live now, and I would go and see her, and she'd had this big 4-bedroom house and 2 4-baths and all these nice things. Then I'd come back home to my little efficiency apartment, and then I'd go back down and see her again. She had a nice car, and she was divorced, and she had a job, worked in a bank where all the money was, and she had this big house, and she worked in a bank. What happened was, after all this time, see, I married her for her money. And I found out a little later that she married me for my body. And what actually happened was we both got disappointed. I kept coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. I think that's the most important thing. And I love AA. You know, I knew before I left Crownsville that Alcoholics Anonymous is exactly what I'd been looking for in my life. I never told anybody that. You know, just recently, within the last year or so, I've been beginning to say that, but I knew that. I've been to all kinds of things. I'm a lapsed Mormon. I've been to many, many different denominations and many different places and looking for something, but I knew Alcoholics Anonymous, through the grace of God and the people that He sent into Crownsville, that this was exactly what I'd been looking for. The way of life was designed for living that you afford us here. And I just knew that. And I knew I wasn't going to drink. I really believe I knew that. I was not cocky about it, and I did not talk about it. And I just kept coming. And I believe in AA because I'm sober. And I've seen so many miracles transpire in this fellowship. So many. I've been privileged to go so many places and do so many things that I would never, ever been able to have done. And I am grateful that I'm an alcoholic. Not because of the things that I did to other people. I'm not happy about that. But I thank God for everything and all the suffering that I had to go through that got me to where I am this evening, because I would never have learned to live the way I know how to live now had it not been for that. My life would have never taken any turns or any avenues that I could have done that. And I'm sure. My life today was never better. It was never better. Really, I have much more of everything than I need. More top coats. I know I will have everything I want, but I certainly have much more of everything than I need. Linda and I have a nice home. We have a nice life. My 10 years with her almost now have been the best 10 years of my life. I've had other years that were good. But to combine, just to circle the thing out, the best 10 years of my life. And she's just really wonderful. And I'm glad I married her, I can tell you that. I wasn't all that sure in the beginning, because I found out she didn't have any money, but I'm glad now. And that really had nothing to do with it. She's a fine person. If you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, just keep coming. That's what they told me. Some people say you should come every day for 90 days, 60 days, or 30 days, 108 and a half days. I really don't know how many days you should come. I really don't. I would like to suggest to you that you come until you want to come. Come every night that is humanly possible until you want to come. And if you do that, if you persist, and you know when you're cheating or not, if you persist in that, the morning will come that you will awaken and start to the bathroom, and you will think to yourself, now which meeting am I going to attend tonight? Which meeting am I going to attend tonight? And it happens thousands and thousands of times. And I think by that time our psyche, when we get to that, is somewhere near the broad highway that we need to be on in order to maintain a comfortable sobriety. The most incredible thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is that it works. It really does. I'll tell you this story about this guy that lived up in Winchester. This happened in Winchester, Apple Country. In a depression, and he had been in school a day in his life, and he was looking for a job, and things were really bad. Really bad. And he looked all over Winchester, and he couldn't find a job. And just looking everywhere, and he wound up in this house of prostitution. And he asked the madam for a job, and she said, yeah, we could use a bookkeeper. He said, well, I don't know how to read or write. She said, I couldn't keep your books. She said, well, I'm sorry. And you could see he was hungry, so she gave him an apple. And when he went out on the streets and he sold the apple. And with that money, he bought some more apples. And with that money, he bought some more apples. He opened an apple store. And then he got into the apple juice business, and the canned apples, and dried apples, and all kinds of apples. Point is that I don't believe there's anybody in here that's an alcoholic that hadn't thought from one time or the other what they would have been in their lives had they not been alcoholics. I thought about that about a month ago. What my life would have been had I not become an alcoholic. And I don't think alcoholics have a corner on that. I think most people think that. If this hadn't happened, but I think particularly the alcoholic thinks about that. What you would have been if you had not been an alcoholic. So this guy just goes on through this apple business. Just keeps on going through the apple business. And he's got apple boats now. He's sending apples to foreign countries. He's made millions of dollars. Millions. He's an apple tycoon is what he is. He has really made it with the apple business. And the day comes that he's going to retire. He wants to get rid of all his problems, and he wants to sign everything over to everybody. And his lawyers get together, they draw up the papers, and they take it over to him, and they ask him to sign. He said, well, I can't read or write. And the lawyer said, what do you mean you can't read or write? So you mean all these millions of dollars, and you mean tell me you can't read or write? This man said, no, I can't. He said, I wonder what in the world you would have been if you could have read or write. He said, I know what I'd have been. I'd have been a bookkeeper in a whole house. I want to, at this time, thank the committee for having me. I want to thank each of you for being here to share your experience and your strength and your hope with me. But most important of all, I want to thank the God of my understanding for my sobriety. God bless you. Right,